Chapter 6. The Lord with the blue spirit pursues the goddess with the pink heart into the bottom of the ocean. The impact sent them deep from the slap of the glassy surface, the middle of the great water, to the target of the landing descent, the tumult and torrent of the fall, the plummet of the crash that made them all like rockets firing down to the scatter of the many nations. But upon heft of terminal acceleration, velocity of flight, they implanted not as deep or as far as they'd thought, even in crystal water, and then they swam and would not sink for any of the breath they held. Every rising bubble, every grace and measured gasp of preempted, predetermined collision, a predicted destruction, entombing, meteoric, the reaction of any engaged disruption impoised with vigor. They swim to the dive of the compressing combustion, imploding against ambient stability, echoing down the sonic promise of the flock to the call and the call of their kind, ether distant, anti-parallel, with the shoal of their streaming fleet. She's like a spirit, the goddess, and in a soul that's sure it needs no air. The blue-eyed lord crawls through the pops and equalizations of his ears, cupping and digging through the water, and as they go, the plateaus and plains and bowls of the ocean fill and swarm from the outer reaches, all of salted, sunken, and then cold sand. There are evil, murderous, predatorial creatures that wander these stricken landscapes as well, close and sheer to the schooling ground. Her heart is yellow and screaming out the last of her air, to blind him in puffs or to end herself afore. The mention of the bottom makes him tremble and quake, and rumble into the depth of the great reflection, once boasting its laughter as they clip off the edge of the last pooling whirl, the final edges of the holding earth, into the whole of the permanent depth, smooth blackness, circumperfect, seething out with noise and music and busted, muted, elevated drums, and the imagination of the entities that created this ghost of sound, this afterlife of purity and orientation and even celebration, as though there were bodies they carried at all to make those waves, to be those communications fizzling between the waves themselves, static and sizzling, alien, antrostellar. There are two ways the blue-eyed lord never does and never can understand: the way of the icy wind and snow on the sunniest, altitudinous mountaintop, and the way of water when it boils, flowing over. If we are to speak, there is no God, then we are to speak also, there is no devil. And evil and hell passes through, and neither with any proof. They keep swimming and chasing each other down, like on shooting weight of the beneath arisen, the blue-eyed lord believing, if not faithful. If you keep swimming down, 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 into the ocean darkness that opens in front of him and her like a vast, flat expanse of pure blackness, a coin of limitless, quelled power like the sun used to be without the light, you might reach a settling point, the bottom of your true breath, and you'd breathe out easy as you float, effortless, back to the top. But as they touch the emptiness, the full silence, the golden, warm-hearted, pink-eyed goddess screams, a piercing bitterness, a full sacrifice of the self as she tears herself apart for love and keeps swimming as though she'd swim all the way back to the top too, now that she needs it, and needs air, and to breathe more than ever, and the blue-eyed lord gasps one last struggle of fear and depth, that either arise, this lost would be suffocating, until he gags in a full, expansive gulp of soaking, salty breath and black water that fills his lungs. Oh! The burning one lands, smoking from his skin. The red-eyed lord in the downstream of the forest takes a breath of fresh, unsucked air, and starts to walk up the trails like the universe is anywhere in front of him. The green-eyed god feels for the sensation, has been landed and asleep among the roots and leaves and stretch of that forest for a lifetime, and then another, and then a quieter, explosive, and scented eon, and feels himself standing in the way of all. But then, in all the ways, every tree and branch, every undergrowth and mushrooming, bark-rotting decomposition, every berry of fruit in every dwindling season of nut and trickled harvest. There are two ways the red-eyed Lord never does and never can understand. The way of the dried wood recoiling and crackling from the fire, and the way of the winter with the spring flowers. He finds the free, poisoned horse in the home of the pasture, kicking back up against itself to dive into the leap and land of the ground, encaged, speeding, and then the way of the summer with the thorns. The red-eyed Lord spends an eternity that way, walking through the boil of the forest as it ignites from his black coals, blossoms into full wildfire, all the stalks of the trees standing, bubbling with greedy flames, kept hot with the vigor of life, the concealment of branches and pines erupting around whole crossings and hillsides of his black, ashen footprints, holding the aura of the burn the way they once held the respiration of the dusted flesh instead, for a time. The green-eyed Lord, babbling and grumbling, somewhere where the spirit flies low when the flesh flies high with the destroyer, has been brooding too long, breeding too many parasites and too many sicknesses with mossy, radioactive disease, sludge grown toxic and down and rooted in the smaller tiers of sewage and survival and mutant infection, and with no hands to cut down to the itch of the vestiges, unpleasing to the sharper magnification of the blissful torch and to the fearful observer in momentum. The green-eyed Lord stands, but learns that to stand is to burn, to stagnate, perspire, and he sees in glints through the eyes of his dreaming memory, whittled down as sharp as the middle summer sun on hot glass, the pathways of the forest, glowing and melting out in hissing, spitting magma, smoking out at the now endless air, erupting up the triangular needle of their shelters in flames for days and days until the stalks, the trunks of the gifting wooden layers of body are charred through, and husks of spire chalk at the center, still, and maybe better, casting the pollen, casting the bundles and flower, their kinds at the lifted, worshipped, cherished edges, the fingertips or the curl of the toes. He wants to tell the red-eyed Lord of all the music of this place, but knows he's not listening anyway, or either as he buries his mind into the scan of escaping, focusing eyes, if he is to be hearing the music regardless, and himself, and the birds fleeing from the forest fire in calls and squeaks of the great screeching cause. The green-eyed Lord abides and gives way to that which takes, and takes alone, and coals in the tortures of the escape, bids him in for the suffering, the billowing uptake, since there are many hills and many follows of the drifting log and stone rolling elevators, the mountains of crumbling, ridging spiral enshrined, arisen and rapturous, starred and fanned in jagged altitude, saddling, conceding, elevated heights, chewing of the sour mist, drifting, guiding, connecting if brushing relegations, and it's like it sears and fries the faces of the forest into representations of metal or remaining, traumatized, living growth. The red-eyed Lord thanks the sun and moon and sky and clouds and stars for the border of the sheeping, gurgling, wallowing lowlands and burrowing, shattering dives of the creek and lake waters, walling a tickling curtain for the calculation, landing, and arrival of interstellar spirits, boundaries, chosen on their own, glimpsed, encompassed, and then, at the promulgation of the descent, grateful at the tilt and grade of their own shied and shifted slant of tier, limited to guise, to abatement of favored influence, locale, dazzled at the burning, sparkling brook, wandering off in nature, he leaves even sanctuary that he passes in ash. A bridling, the purple-eyed goddess wafts onto fields of yellow grass gone tan and orange with grain, swaying, whistling. The orange hazel-eyed Lord lays with the dust, the flat plain of eternal warm rest, as the sunrise brings bright day and cooks over them, smooth and lasting, consistent and hot, the many, many sprouts and rises of his children, plains of them. each one on each circular or squared plot of sandy, soft, cherished and choice ground, shallow and tentative, sprouted with needles and crowns of the vestigial flowers, gone to husks, bearing seed, but thinning away and without the fruit, choking the wild animals that sneak through the forbiddings and try to chew the nourishment from the tops of their stalks, with sticky sheaves, prickled abandonment, and long spindles that tickle and scrape and slice and serrate and itch at the passing, or heavy, lazy, laying sky, its trade, conquer, fall, faith, and fair resolve, and any overpowering, preparing celestial body endure the drip of ranking exposure, happier separated in soul, near in body. Go on from here, they whisper to the skins of gods, and in from the land of distance, the bounds of many and none. Rise and run, or fly, or travel, or search. Chase and crumble, they say, but the purple-eyed goddess does not hear them. She stands as the full winds lengthen beneath the pillar of her robes, ruffling them up at the fringes, with the breeze and the rattle of the swoop, a lifted and then suspension, spherical outcurl, a wavering, floating, returning glide before the suicidal vortex of weather and weathered creatures alike, carnivorous, scattered, landing, enthrushed. It would be as difficult to see the destroyer destroyed as it would be to witness the Creator created, it seems. And as the day passes, shining and clear, feeding all of them in the baking compassion, the click and titter of the first fall of the sun, multiplying in its failing exuberance, a long concentration at sunset, sundown, as the long reflection was of the morning, detaches, reminds them that the light ends, that it does end, and for some of them, still giving the sacrifice of this moment, again and again, always in the cutting and aging of the fire for the eternal moment, impassioned, exhilarated, reveling in the unbearable, the time over-stealing space, wounded, innumerable, heightless as well as sizeless, as well as depthless in their dusty whispers, before they all start screaming through those silent, open breaths of spirit, it does end. The clouds roll in from the last leaps of the mountain, some that leapt over, some that coaled themselves back to the promise. A new day that begins in the night, a new glow of the sleeping moon, but they and the orange-eyed sun god himself, this very dirt, plowed and tilled once and once set adrift, sleeps in satisfaction through truth. The purple-eyed goddess, with fanned irises, beating and dripping with crying vessels at the sight of the sun, of the free light, stolen, cowering, lush, lets the field know that in the war, in the blood and disembowelment, in the simple settling of the work of the infinite horizon, infinite beneath as it never sees infinite above, always closer through the towing feet, cramping, digging, there is sex and stings of pain that waver through pleasure, cleanings and degradations and rapes, giggles and roaring orgasms that, though the day ends now, with as much light for the night in color, there is a day that comes again, as it has, and does again. She reminds them, gives them the knowledge that at the promise of continuous rebirth, at the even engagement of cycling, orbiting odds, their deaths can be as many as the rains that fall here no thicker than in shade, and grazings, their violences and battles and courts and competitions, worth as little as those unaware who suffer, whom they make suffer for their thirst, their desire, all throbbing now at their dry, rigid, crackling hearts. Their final death leads them to life again, teaches them that they were worshipping death by worshipping God and the sky. She stills herself, a foot each on a pad of crunched stalks, bending over, and shows the orange-eyed sun god with his single, static viewpoint of clarity and apocalypse, and bared out of their wrath and self-destruction, whatever the purpose or intent, would take them to a heaven of that very same, culminating death, and that all life was hot or cold, but there was, in the environments, in the elements, no difference between pain and pleasure, only intensity of sensation, depth and finesse of mutilation, of love or hate, a way out at the bottom, a way in at the top, and they hope both for the most high of altitudes and the sunkenest escalations of binds, but in comfort, in her caressing fingers of mine, if there was no path or stance to end life without, and except in yours, of the endless, aware, electric death, then there was also no death, not of any self that would not start with your life, start you with life, no death that would not end again with birth. Your sins are those for you to choose, and if you are to die before you awake, you may know very little of the difference as you awake with new purpose, new memory. The clouds settle in perfect rumples, wallowing underneath with thick purple and shining out and over, and facing the lidded pier, white-orange, zestful, a tranquil coating. They come only so low as the reaches of the finest growths, and tiered and jagged as that has snagged out whole bites before. It settles in a plain, the rising water, because they have, and in their time too, though they always want more before the beckoning, the continuance, taken. It reminds them that none touch the sky, but all are already touching, and accountable, and playful, and naked and worthless. She shows them that there is another burn to pass, and that they must drink deep of the fuel, whether bitter or sweet, whether respective to poison or purity, sugar or alcohol, smoke or dreams of chases, thieves and sweeties, unfitted, nameless or not, if they wish, and wish, and wish. And see how soon that morning comes to seethe and cook another imaginary eternity, still crossing the many oceans every day like no legs, like no arms, like no flesh communal, refined, imprisoned, and complacent. The shine is long before the warmth, and the quenched thirst wicks away cool in any breathless ice, any cold light, far and circles before the placation and the permeation of the leavening. The day never has, and never does, have any more or fewer hours than the night. Ticks of the flow, swings of the weightless, only the awake, and as they spark, knowing they love the prism, the hidden oasis, how they love to see the sparks fly more than the love itself. She shows them that in the deepest setting, beneath their closing, enravening, besilvering eyelids, courageous or unconscious, streaks of moonlight that guides and touches the sun through the rock and the mud and the grass and the earth, envision that there is sleep, release. There are two ways that the orange-eyed Lord never does and never can understand. The way of the black, natural, soul, paper-thin bird of death in the brushing, bristling land of vertical life, drinking from the clear streams where they pool and spout, and the way of the flocking birds of hue, of season, of the hunt, of the light and the seed and the high winds for the heavy, the whole aeration, the limitless, ruthless dynamic of the unstoppable, the above, riding the waves of the flat summer in the land of death. There is Severance.